The end of the year is here, and before we let you guys go for summer, we wanted to recommend some books for you to read that the district encourages you to read before English 2 honors. It could be as many of these books as you want, but I would definitely suggest reading at least a few because it gives you a good idea of what you might be reading and learning next year. So we're going to go through some of the ones on the list and we'll provide you guys with the full list, but these are the ones that we thought might interest you guys the most. So here we go. So this is the summer reading list as we have it. So All American Boys is by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Cayley. It's a young adult novel that looks at specific instances of police brutality from the perspective of 2 high school classmates, Rashad, who is savagely beaten by a local policeman who wrongly suspects him of shoplifting and assaulting a white woman, and Quinn, who sees the beating and initially pretends he didn't. So it is definitely realistic fiction that is very time appropriate and kind of straight from the headlines type of book. Next is Before I Fall. This book's been around for a while, and while I haven't read this book by Oliver, I do love her as an author. It follows senior Samantha Kingston on Cupid Day, where there's Valentine's, and then she dies in a terrible accident that night. However, she still wakes up the next morning. In fact, she lives the last day of her life 7 times until realizes that by making even the slightest changes, she may hold power than she ever imagined. Now, it's probably an old movie, but if you've ever seen the movie Groundhog Day, I think this book is like a fun teen version of that. And I believe they made a movie. I haven't heard anything about it being good or not, however. Between Shades of Grey is actually a historical fiction book. It follows a 15-year-old Lithuanian girl who's during 1941, and Soviet officers barge into her home, tearing her family apart. Her mother, her, and her young brother make their way north, crossing the Arctic Circle to a work camp in the coldest reaches of Siberia. They were forced under Stalin's orders to dig for beets and fight for their lives under the cruelest of conditions. She finds solace in her art, documenting events by drawing, hoping these messages will make their way to her father's prison camp to let them know they are still alive. This one is really powerful. It is definitely based on a lot of true stories. I can't remember exact numbers, but millions of people died in these work camps in Siberia in the 1940s under Stalin's rule. So it may be a very interesting read if you're into historical fiction. The next is another book that's historical fiction that takes place around the same time but is very different. It's called The Book Thief. I love this book. The synopsis is death has never been busier and will be busier still. It follows Liesel, a girl who steals books for fun. The first one she steals is the Gravedigger's Handbooks. She is stealing books from Nazi book burnings, Mayor's Wife's Library, and wherever books to be found. But these are dangerous times when Liesel's foster family hides a Jew in their basement. Liesel's world is both opened up and closed down. And Death is the narrator of this book, so it's really, really cool. I definitely personally recommend it. The Color Purple by Walker is a very famous book that won Pulitzer Prize. It depicts the lives of African-American women in the early 20th century, rural Georgia. I always don't like the word rural. Separated as girls, sisters Sally and Nettie sustain their loyalty and hope to each other across time, distance, and silence. Through a series of letters spanning 20 years, the first from Sally to God, then the sisters to each other, despite the unknown, and the novel draws readers into its rich, memorable portrayals of Sally, Nettie, Shug, Avery, and Sophia in their experiences. It was a book that broke silence around domestic and sexual abuse, narrating the lives of women through their own pain and struggle, companionship, and growth. It's a very, very powerful book. This Dark Endeavor. It's kind of a retelling of Frankenstein. Victor and Conrad are twin brothers, Frankenstein and inseparable inseparable until Conrad falls gravely ill, so another historical fiction book. In the Forbidden Dark Library, Victor finds an ancient formula and seeks an alchemist to recreate the elixir of life. With friends, he scales the highest tree in the Stromwald, dives deepest lake caves, and each sacrifices a body part. So sounds kind of spooky if you like creepy books. Highly Illogical Behavior by Whaley. It is realistic fiction. 16-year-old Solomon is agoraphobic. He hasn't left the house in 3 years, which is fine by him. This girl named Lisa wants to get into the second best psychology program. So she is determined to fix Solomon, and things pursue from there, and they build friendships. Illuminae by Kaufman and Kristoff. It's a really, really interesting book that's told through letters, emails, hacked files, and it's Katie thought breaking up with Ezra was the worst thing she'd ever been through. That was before her planet was invaded. Now, with the enemy fire raining down on them, Katie and Ezra are forced to fight their way into the evacuating craft with an enemy warship in hot pursuit. There's a deadly plague broken out and it's mutating. Sounds a little on the nose for what's happening right now. The fleet's AI, which if you protected them, may actually be the biggest threat. As Katie plunges into a web of data hacking to get the truth, it's clear only one person can help her bring it all to light, Ezra. So it's action-packed, science fiction, really, really interesting. Definitely recommend it. The Reader by Chi. Her father, after Sepia knows what it means to survive, her father's brutally murdered, and she flees into the wilderness with her aunt, where she learns to track, hunt, and steal. Books are forbidden, and she finds a book, and it's unheard of. It's not that it's forbidden, it's unheard of because her society is illiterate. Almost everyone's illiterate and can't read. So her aunt's kidnapped, and with a book she finds that she learns how to read, she sets to rescue her aunt and find out why her father was killed. Red Queen, love this book. It's like a mix of if X-Men kind of met with the Bachelor a little bit. Was it Bachelor? I can't remember the one I always compare it to, but imagine if the world was divided by blood, red or silver. The Reds are commoners, ruled by the silver elite who possess godlike superpowers like the X-Men. Maribaro is a red girl from poverty. She goes into the palace, ends up in a fight, and it reveals that she has these superpowers despite her blood being red. So they claim that she is this long-lost princess, and there's a lot of intrigue, politics, court dynamics, and lots of fighting and training. So it's really great. And there is a bit of a love story in there too, and it's a great trilogy. The Serpent King by Zentner. So Dill has had to wrestle with vipers his whole life at home as the only son of a Pentecostal minister who urges him to handle poisonous rattlesnakes, and at school where he faces down bullies who target for his father's extreme faith and very public fall from grace. The only antidote to all this venom is the friendship with fellow outcasts. It's in a rural Tennessee town. It is very much kind of a realistic fiction book, and just about how outcasts come together in friendship. Speak by Anderson is, to me, one of the most powerful books I ever read. It follows a girl named Melinda. She's friendless, outcast, because she busted an end of summer party by calling the cops so no one will talk to her at her school. As time passes, she becomes increasingly isolated and practically stops talking altogether. She finds solace in her art class, and it is through her work on an art project that she is finally able to face what really happened to her at the terrible party. She was raped by an upperclassman, a guy who still attends Merriweather and is still a threat to her. Her healing process has just begun when she has another violent encounter with him, but this time Melinda fights back, refuses to be silent, and thereby achieves a measure of vindication. It's really powerful. I definitely encourage it, especially if you like books that are kind of about tough topics. It's really powerful. I have not read this one, Sunrise Over Fallujah by Myers. It just sounded very, very interesting to me. It's about this Operation Iraqi Freedom, so the Iraq War. That's the code name, but the young men and women in the military civil affairs battalion have a simpler name for it, war. It looks at contemporary war with the same power and searing insight that he's had in his other books. He creates memorable characters like the book's narrator's Birdie, a young recruit from Harlem who's questioning why he's even enlisted, Marla, a blonde, tough-talking, wisecracking gunner, and Jonesy, a guitar-playing bluesman who just wants to make it back to Georgia and open a club. And now we are on memoirs. There is going to be a unit about memoirs in English too. And this one is by Claude Brown. It is an autobiography. It is a thinly veiled fictional account of Claude Brown's childhood as a hardened streetwise criminal trying to survive the toughest streets of Harlem, and has been heralded as the definitive account of everyday life for the first generation of African Americans raised in the northern ghettos of the 1940s and 1950s. This one's a graphic novel one. It's called To Dance. It follows ballerinas when they first dream of dancing. Sienna is 6, and her dreams kept skipping and leaping, circling and spinning from airy runs along the beach near her home in Puerto Rico to dance classes at the School of American Ballet to her debut performance on stage with the New York City Ballet while working with the ballet legend George Blanchine. It's part family history, part backstage drama. It's a updated graphic memoir. A Long Way Gone is one of the most celebrated memoirs in recent history. It's the devastating story of war through the eyes of a child soldier. Bay tells how at the age of 12, he fled attacking rebels and wandered a land rendered unrecognizable by violence. By 13, he picked up by the government army and became a soldier. This is how wars were fought now. By children, hopped up on drugs and wielding AK-47s. Children have become soldiers of choice. In the more than 50 conflicts going on worldwide, it is estimated that there are 300,000 children's soldiers. Ishmael Bell used to be one of them. When I Was Puerto Rican by Santiago. It's her story, which begins in rural Puerto Rico, where her childhood was filled with both tenderness and domestic strife, tropical sounds and sights, as well as poverty. And then she enters schools. We see a clash because they take off to New York. And it's both hilarious and fierce, the clash between Puerto Rican and Yankee culture. Esmeralda is the oldest of 11 children, and she must learn new rules, a new language, and eventually make a new identity. It follows her earliest years and her tremendous journey from the barrio Brooklyn, from translating for her mother at the welfare office to high honors at Harvard. Persepolis is another graphic novel. It is one of my personal favorites. It's Marjane Satrapi's memoir of growing up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. It's about black and white comic strip. She tells the story of her life in Tehran from ages 6 to 14, years that saw the overthrow of the Shah's regime, the triumph of the Islamic Revolution, and the devastating effects of war with Iraq. The intelligent, outspoken only child of committed Marxists and the great-granddaughter of one of Iran's last emperors, Marjane bears witness to a childhood uniquely intertwined with the history of her country. I definitely recommend it. It's amazing. And those are the books we're going to highlight for possible summer reading choices. We will provide the full list with you, and I hope you guys have a great summer filled with reading.